After you get past the mission, the vision, the purpose, then you get into the goals and the objectives of the organization. And the CEO absolutely owns the outcomes. How people are treated, the scorecard is achieved, the inventory levels, cash flow. It's his or her problem at the end of the day, and they better own it.
Welcome to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rain. Successful leaders make building healthy culture a priority. Meet other leaders who are building a culture where people want to stay and know how to win together.
Hey leaders, welcome back to the Build Your Culture Brand podcast. I have with me today Bill Forster from CEO Zones. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate our new relationship. Thank you.
Bill, I've also enjoyed getting to know you over the last several months, and I appreciate the work that you're doing primarily through CEO Zones and other work, other relationships that you have. So it's been good to get to know you and find so much alignment around culture and ownership and execution, all these ideas that we've been talking about. And then you have it, we'll get into a third one that you're honed in on, and that's optimization. But today, I want our audience to get to know you a little bit and understand how they might benefit from a relationship with you through your platform, and then we can talk also about what we're learning about culture and some ideas about how we might implement those right here with our organizations, even in the next 5 minutes. We want things to be practical, don't we, Bill?
Exactly. It's about helping people get better results somehow in their life. So yes, people.
Good. Yep. Bill, I'm looking forward to getting into the topics that we've selected for today on culture and ownership. And I also want to hear a little bit about your work with CEOs around the country and around the world. But just so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better, tell us, a question that I like to use is, what is a leadership, if you were to kind of ask your core team around you, what's your leadership superpower? And then what might be your leadership kryptonite? What might they say about you?
So a self-evaluation of my superpower first would be that I know how to hire the best of the best people. And I think I learned that from one of our mutual acquaintances, Truett Cathy at Chick-fil-A, way early in the beginning of Chick-fil-A. And then Jimmy Collins carried that through, and Dan Cathy carried that through. And one of our other content partners, Deanne Turner, certainly carried that through, and actually came up with how do we attract and keep and interview to ensure they have the best people there. But that was a very long time ago for me. That would have been in the 70s and 80s back there where I was learning that. So that's a self-evaluation. According to the many assessments I've taken over the years and talking to my leadership team, I like to connect people and then figure out how do I arrange for that pair of people, those peers together, that small team, or a whole organization. How do I get them to live their values, reach their goals? And I like taking pieces of puzzles, except the pieces of the puzzles are the people, and putting them together and saying, hey, you two ought to work together, which I think we have tried that ourselves, actually. So I'd say that's probably the answer. And one of my biggest questions I ask when I meet somebody new is, how can we serve others together? Because it doesn't matter where we are, it's still about encouraging people and getting people to reach what they want to reach, but also make sure they're reaching for the right things and not going to hurt themselves or their family in the reach. So,
well, I love the way you connect people and just the way, I've already seen that happen with us. So thank you for that. Using your superpower in such a powerful way, even in our relationship. So thank you for that. What would be a leadership, an example of something that works against you?
So here I'll take the perception of others, because I don't see that. That's a blind spot.
Okay.
But I just this morning, I was at a breakfast meeting with one of the CEOs that I locally love near and dear, a young fella who has a couple hundred million, I guess he's about $100 million business now, but he started in his dorm room in college. And he looks me dead in the eyes and he goes, "You process guys drive me crazy." And this is a software development company. So I guess my kryptonite there is I get a little too process driven, and I love structure. When your assistant Katie sent me a bulleted outline, I analyzed that, thought about that, where some others might just say, "Oh, that's a good directional thing." I look at that as it's black and white. So I guess that's kryptonite. I have to be very careful of that. In my own team, every once in a while, I'll get the email or the discussion that says, "Are you micromanaging?" And I have to respond with, "No, I'm looking for where the obstacles are that are going to keep you from doing your job or reaching your goal or having a great relationship at home." So that's one that I have learned later in life, unfortunately. Early in life, I might not have been quite receptive to that. So,
well, it sounds like you're being very coachable and receiving that feedback well. So good on you for
that's my
letting others
opinion.
help you. That's right.
I've been married 49 years next month, so I don't know how coachable I am. But anyway.
Wow, congratulations. I would say
Thank you.
that says you're growing. So if you're able to make it to 49 years, that's amazing. Congratulations on that for you and your
Thank
wife
you.
both. So
Thank you. And I guess another way to overcome that micromanaging perception, or I'm thinking I'm removing obstacles, some of the tools, again, back to being a process kind of person, weekly review meetings with the team. So everybody gets to see where are we winning? Where do we need to beef up some type of result that we're trying to reach? And then that bi-monthly one-on-one is absolutely critical so that that other person has the opportunity to freely one-on-one say, "Bill, uh, this is what I felt. This is what I saw. This is what you said, blah, blah, blah. Let's get back to working together because we've chosen to work together. So we got to make the best of it." So I'd say that's how we readdress it here.
keeping that communication open, that's a great idea. And putting in, there you go, there's a process. You have a system. You have a system for making sure that there's feedback loops happening. What way to use your kryptonite to win at that's awesome. I want to just take a minute here and help people understand, and because it's so targeted at the topic that we're talking about today about culture, you've actually created an online platform for CEOs to gather together and grow together and learn more about these three topics specifically: culture, execution, and optimization. Tell us a little bit about why have you created this platform? What do you hope it does for the world?
Okay. Um, well, why did I create it? We're still figuring out all the nuts and bolts, but I had shortly been retired again and sold our last consulting company with my partner. We did very well, and my wife was taking me on some forced fun, and we were going to Australia for a couple months. And after the chit chat of the first 5 hour flight, and then we get ready to get on the 20-hour flight, um, I get to thinking to myself, what assets do I have? How do I want to engage now in retirement? Um, and the assets that I have are a great network of chief executive officers who we've worked with over the years at several consulting companies, but the last 21 years at Main Point. And so that's one asset. And then I got to thinking, well, who might benefit from that network? And I'm not looking to cause a transactional cash back and forth. That's not what the platform's about. The platform's about, again, connecting and arranging, if you will. So, and we connected and arranged some content partners. And I put out a email and a couple phone calls during my trip down there. And lo and behold, Mark Miller, Randy Gravitt from Chick-fil-A, they just retired recently. And they said, "Bill, we have all this content. We don't know what you're up to, but feel free to use our content." And shortly thereafter, we had about 17 content partners, and I call them zones. People might call them topics. People might call them subjects, but we decided to call them CEO zones because we're about the whole leader, not just leadership. So yes, we have General Gronsky, a 2-star retired general. He does talk about leadership, but he absolutely knows many other things, amazingly. So in the app, we have some hobbies in there. We have more detail around culture. We have several culture experts. I would say Mark Miller would be one of those. His book, Culture Roles, was one of my favorite books. Deanne Turner's book on crushing your career, how to get attracted to the right organization, how to stay there and cause a career. Just a bunch of different content partners came together, and then a bunch of CEOs came together. And I'd say the one word I'd add there that in your description, Jay, would be some CEOs come and share with others how they've gotten great results, how they've created a high performance culture. Other CEOs are asking the questions of, would you share with me how you do that? And it could be topics all over the place, but could be American history as a topic in the app now. We have an American history professor, Dr. Alan Harrelson. We just did his Meet the Speaker video the other day, and he is all about American history and American business history. So different zones, different ways to bring people together and have a real community where they're helping each other. That's kind of where it came from, I guess, to answer that question, and why. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And thanks for also including me as a content partner. So I'm privileged to be a part of that group. I'm looking forward to all the benefits of those relationships and getting to know everyone. So I appreciate being included there as well. And talking about culture, and for us, culture and ownership are some of the big topics that our team covers. So we're looking forward to sharing some tools there. Well, Bill, I have a question for you. You know, when it comes to this culture execution optimization, there's kind of an overarching topic above that, and that's that core ideology. You know, when we're talking about someone's mission, vision, values, purpose, all that package of ideas. As you've worked with organizations over the years, what's one way that you've noticed that organizations are able to maintain their trajectory on their purpose, mission, vision, values?
So I'm not the culture expert like you are or a Mark Miller, but I believe it starts with the foundation. The CEO's personal values need to align with the organizational values. And if they don't, sometime in the midterm, not short term, not long term, but in the midterm, there's going to be a disaster. Because that leader needs to, when they look at the corporate values, if they're not looking to change them, they're looking to live them, and they don't match up, it's just a bad thing. So I'd say that's kind of like ground zero, if you will. Then moving from that, how do you engage people in the culture around the habits of the organization, the normative behaviors of the organization? At CEO Zones, we're only 7 months old last week. But in the middle of that, I took a motor coach trip with my grandchildren, two of my grandchildren. And so I was semi-detached most of the time, and decisions were made without me. And that was great. But when I came back, they knew I would not say no to certain CEO sizes, certain types of business. So I came back and got to looking through what are the results that we've had for these 2 months that I was mostly roaming 14 national parks with my grandkids, my daughter, and my wife. And the numbers were skewed in a direction. So I think the other part of that would be it's my responsibility as a CEO to follow up on that and make sure that even though we're going down the right one-way street, are we going 25 mile an hour? Are we looking in the windows? Are we window shopping? Are we paying attention to that car that stops in front of us and we don't slam into the back of it? So part of that'd be kind of the next part, and how you set up those people and processes and authorities and what are the expectations. And then, as Deanne Turner would say, really ensure that your values align with, even as a person working in any organization, working in the plant as an operator of a piece of equipment, do you really believe the organizational values? Do they really live them? Because it's an individual thing. It's back to, I got to do my part, and you change that culture one person at a time. And so don't go somewhere, I guess is my advice, that you don't align with. It's not about the money. The second you get your paycheck, you kind of forget what it was. You pay your bills, and it's about who are you working with and why are you working with them. So I don't know if I answered your question the way you expected, but that's kind of my thinking.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so that, yeah, it's that idea of, at the highest level, the responsibility, the largest part of the responsibility is making sure we're still on that mission, vision, values, and purpose. And I heard in there some different things like when you stepped away, there may have been a miss on what the targets were, what the goals were within that journey. It wasn't that they were off the road. It was just maybe they weren't as far down the road as you expected. So
We had
there is
more
that.
success in a different avenue, I'll say,
Yeah.
than I wanted, which is okay. We didn't say no to anyone in our community. But my personal network would be that $1 billion and larger revenue CEO. So we cultivated some great people who aren't necessarily in that club. And I wasn't paying attention to the sub numbers or the micro numbers. I was paying attention to the top line numbers while I was with my family. And the top line numbers were in different avenues, I'll say. So it was all good. But I guess when I think of all those different terms and you see everybody's website, and any company anyway starts with what's their mission, vision, values, or some or purpose, those words, I guess I always sum it up into something about what is the company I want to work for. That really comes back to the values of the company. Do they care about their people? Do they care about their customers? Do they care about their shareholders? Because all those buckets happen to be humans and they're all people. And for every employee, there's 5, 6, 7 people counting on that money, counting on that good value, counting on dad coming home happy, not sad, not grumpy. Mom coming home at lunch to maybe have lunch and then go back to work. All those things it's people are living their lives. And so to me, it's about the company I want to work for. And what does that mean to me? And I probably over process that.
But, oh, that's good. Thank you. And I think what you're alluding to there too is there's a human element to the vision that we have. I mean, at some point, a vision has to have humans involved, and we have to have you realize there's humanity and there's heart. We may have their head, but do we have their heart? So when I hear discussions about purpose and values, I feel like we're really trying to engage the heart. And you alluded to that about in your discussion about an alignment on values that they're if these values aren't within your same value set, then there's going to be a train wreck at some point. So it's a great thing for you to point out there.
Due to my client base, I hate to use the term train wreck, but yes, you're correct. A lot of larger CEOs, a train wreck is a very bad day. So yes.
I understand. Actually, my one of my relatives had a train wreck behind her apartment the other day. A true train wreck, and it was like it made the news. It was within a few feet of some of the balconies. It was really, yeah. Train wrecks are not a good thing. So, but everybody understands what we mean by that kind of level of destruction in an organization. Bill, as you described this idea of an organization and the importance of having values, and I heard in there you are relating to maybe $1 billion organizations or $100 million organizations or various sizes, and I would imagine all of those have a hierarchy, right? They have layers within the organization, and those can get pretty deep, quite a bit of layers and maybe different departments, different regions. And while I see that, but the other thing I heard you say was the values should matter as much to the CEO as it does to the frontline person. And so I've developed a term. I'll float this out there and see what you think about it. This term that I'm using is to have a flat culture. While we may have hierarchical, offices and authority and organization, culture has to be the same from top to bottom. And so that makes the culture needs to be flat in that way, that the values apply to the CEO as much as they do to someone on a production line. What do you think about that terminology of flat culture, and how might that relate to your thinking with culture and values?
I think flat culture, if I'm hearing you right, means that it's common across all individuals, no matter what their title, no matter what their authority, no matter what their role. So if that's the case, yes, those are going to be the highest performing companies and probably the longest lasting. If you think about some of the companies that were stable, huge, multi-billion dollar, great marketing, great people, and then the values are what got them. Either the leadership values or the quality values of the product or the service. That's usually what kills the organization. And I can rattle off a couple names in my mind that happened in the 80s, 90s, where the world was their oyster and they're no longer, uh, because they didn't live their values, or they tried to cause a public company try to cause great results every 13 weeks, and then they got caught into one of these, oh well, we'll ship it in place, was one of my favorite things when I was in the printing industry. um, print an order, it's the last day of the month, it's not, there's still a shift to go, but it's the last day of the month, we're going to ship it in place. Well, that meant we invoice the client on the last day of the month, because on the first day of the month they get a new 30 days of payment back then in those days. So we shipped in place. That was not correct, and we had to change our ways there. So to me, it's every level. It would be a good thing, a good flat thing, but that also means that every person understands their flat metric for themselves, if we use the word flat. So CEOs has goals that are put on him by the board, put on him by himself if he's the founder, or however that works for each individual. But then everybody in the organization needs to keep score and understand what game they're playing at each level of the organization.
That's so good. And because we need to be playing the same game, and so the scoreboard should matter for everyone. It might be more granular, but yeah, the scoreboard has to matter. And so it relates back to values, that we can't have a different set of values for each level of the organization. We need to have values that run all the way through and everyone's equally accountable to. So thanks for helping flesh out that term. I appreciate the
One
thinking
more
behind.
one more grandfatherly thought came through about a flat culture, and that would be the decisions you're making there. If you live your values, the hard decisions are made. It takes seconds to decide: do I cheat? Do I steal? Do I whatever is against the values? And many organizations who are mediocre, I'll say, and there's too many of those out there, average performers, they're not living the values, so therefore they're making some cut the corner decisions, not treat people well decisions, very short-sighted decisions, because they don't understand or they don't live their values. So to me, that's you're onto something here, Jay, about the flat culture.
Well, appreciate that. I'm writing about it, and I thought I'd share that idea with you. So now, if you take an organization like we're talking about, and these various sizes of organizations, one of the words, the kind of a buzzword right now in leadership, is ownership. Right? Ownership is this big word. It actually, it's kind of getting hard to define, because it carries so many ideas within it. But this idea of ownership, I have some people that, they ask, what do you mean? Do you mean actual, like, dollar shareholder ownership? And we're talking about leadership ownership here in the business, that you have a piece of the business that you're responsible for. We might say responsibility. But as you think about that word ownership, how would you define maybe some ideas behind the idea of ownership? How would you flesh that out for our audience?
Right. So I think after you get past the mission, the vision, the purpose, then you get into the goals and the objectives of the organization. And the CEO absolutely owns the outcomes, how people are treated, the scorecard is achieved, EBITDA is lifted, inventory levels, cash flow. it's his or her problem at the end of the day, and they better own it. So that to me is at that highest level. But as you roll those goals down, as I think about it through the many levels of the organization, um, I'll make one up. I have $1 million of EBITDA, which would not be a lot in my client base, but we'll say have $1 million. We'll keep it easy. Well, what is my responsibility at the end of the production line? And I'm making $50,000 of that $1 million EBITDA product. So maybe it's $200,000 of product I'm making. Uh, I own that line. I own it to be maintained well. I own it to be safe. I own it that my team shows up on time, that they're trained properly. I own this production line. That's how I see that as we go down and roll down goals. And then how do we roll them back up in a scorecard? Or how do we know that I had a good day as a production supervisor? Was my crew of 18 showed up? I made my $50,000 worth of widgets. No one got hurt is most important in that particular metric. And my equipment's going to be maintained. And tomorrow morning, we're going to come in and we're going to have the great morale of knowing we had a great day today. And we're going to try to make it a little bit better tomorrow. And we don't know how that is yet, but we're going to constantly be tweaking to optimize that culture, that execution, and that optimization to make that line work better. And maybe it's somebody feeding us parts from a different line. Can we have a little bit of a backlogs because my line might run faster than theirs, or I need their parts, or I need their tow motor at a certain time at the end of the line. All those different things to me add up to how do you drive it down? How do you properly get the buy-in from every single person in the organization? And then how do you roll it back up so you know that that team of 18 had a great day? Or not, and maybe they need help. Maybe they have an obstacle.
I really appreciate that example, and it's this picture. I appreciate the idea of your as a leader, you're rolling down the data. You have this big goal, and then what I hear in that is part of a leader's role is to roll it down at each level and roll it down in a way that makes sense for that team. So I'm taking this big goal and I'm going to help you make sense of what that means for your team to be a part of that. So appreciate that idea of rolling it down.
Absolute two-way clarity or you will fail. Yep.
There you go.
Yep.
And then the other thing I heard in there, something we've been teaching with our organizations is, let's say you're spending, an X factor of pushing that down and making sure it rolls down into the organization. And you're spending, X amount of effort doing that. What's the 3X or 5X or 10X data coming back to you that says, hey, we did it? And so creating that virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I think that's how you lever the clarity of the goal. And as the reason the CEO or the executive leadership team needs to roll those goals down, whether they be annual goals, quarterly goals, weekly goals, daily goals, hourly goals, a factory setting every 6 minutes goal, whatever that might be, there has to be absolute clarity and ownership of the message you're giving. And it's your responsibility to make sure your message was received and it's somewhat realistic. Now, I understand a SMART goal or a smarter goal, depending on the format you might use. But it's got to be realistic. And usually there's a best demonstrated practice of something that you're just trying to achieve that maybe your neighbor did, maybe your buddy did, but you're competing against yourself on that small team to get that better result. And you really get the mind going of 18 people thinking about how to have a fun, good, productive, efficient, safe day is a whole lot better than the CEO walking by the line once in a while and saying, hey, I think you oughta. It's about getting those 18 minds that are right there at the spot of that goal and where it's happening. To me, anyway.
Thanks for that example. Would you happen to have maybe a real world example of that taking place and how it played out? Maybe you could eliminate names, but is there an example you could share about where that got turned around in an organization?
Well, fortunately, in the consulting implementation supply chain world, I could probably give you hundreds of examples because we were pretty successful at hiring great people who work with great companies. They might not have been great when we started, but they certainly were well on the path to great when we transformed their supply chain. So I was actually thinking and visualizing in my mind one example as I was explaining that. So I'll go back. I'm old, so we'll go back not quite to the Civil War, but back, if you remember, in your backyard in the 50s and 60s, there were these things called swing sets, and they were made out of metal. And this would have been, I don't remember the years now, but Walmart used to buy 110, real number, 110,000 metal swing sets that came in these giant boxes. And the poor dad called his dad, who called his dad, and the three dads spent 3 days putting this swing set together.
Oh, I remember. I think I was a son of the dad situation, but I remember putting one of those together.
So this particular client happened to be the second largest swing set manufacturer of all the parts, the metal parts, the tubing, the chain, the seat, the plastic seats, the little horse you could ride that was out of plastic and would swing, the sliding board out of metal or plastic. But in any event, so our job as consultants, and I happen to be in charge of this particular team doing this deliverable, if you will, we had 8 months to improve the production by 25,000 swing sets, or Walmart wouldn't accept this particular, our client's order for the year, and they ordered once a year. So we were literally trying to take out number one and become number one all in this very short period of time. And oh, by the way, safety and cost and all those other things are critical. It's not just make and quality and delivery on time and the trucks and things like that. So we had a team, and there was probably 50 people on the packing line. So this is all the parts have now been painted. They've been powder coated. They've been plastic. The chain has the plastic on it so you don't hurt the fingers. All these safety things are in there, but you have literally, if you've ever put one together, hundreds of parts, big parts, little parts, no directions, just parts, right? Well, the right part and the right package to get it there, not just from the factory, but to the Walmart distribution center, to the Walmart store, and then make sure it gets safely to the home. That's all the responsibility of this particular packing line team. So you had to have the right packaging, you had to go in the right order, you had to make sure you had 11 these, and 200 bolts, and 300 screws, and all the different parts came together. And then you had to weigh it, because if there was a difference in the weight, you knew you were missing something. So you might manually, back in those days, fortunately we got smarter, but back in those days, you might have to unpack that whole box to figure out what did you miss. Because Walmart had a 100% return it, do not make one customer unhappy policy. And so you couldn't afford it. It was cheaper to fix it right then and there than to let that get out to the field, let it get damaged, let it get to somebody's backyard, and they complain because Walmart's going to come right around and make us fix it or make us replace it. So us being the client. But that would be an example, I guess, trying to answer that. But that's what I was visualizing when I was answering.
Did they win? Did they make it to the end? Did y'all?
Of course they did. They were my client, Jay. I mean, I'm sorry you didn't assume that.
Yeah. I did, but I wanted to make sure our listeners who don't know you as well know that you accomplished it. So
yeah, and I believe their gross margin was up about 35% for that particular unit, and Walmart was able to sell it for $5 less. And I don't remember the retail price, but we're talking $120 back then, maybe for a whole swing set. So yeah, everybody win. It's got to be a win for everybody, or it won't happen the next year. And then unfortunately, number one went out of business because they so relied on that order from Walmart that my client took it one time and they did not do the proper thing. They didn't watch their balance sheet. They didn't have cash flow. They just assumed they were going to get it. And our client took it, and the competitor went out of business, which made my client win that for years and years to come. But not too many metal swing sets anymore. But anyway, back in those days, they were.
Right. And speaking of safety, when it finally got to my house and I was on the swing set, we were swinging in it so hard we were trying to get the whole thing to rise up off the ground. So safety.
That's another reason Walmart doesn't sell those anymore. Yes. Or trying to swing so hard you go up and over and then wrap the chain.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
even more fun. Especially if you could put your younger brother or sister in it and make them go around a few times.
That same client is the one that, if you remember trampolines from those days,
okay.
They didn't have the nets around the side. So you could be bouncing along and fly into your backyard tree or fall into the sidewalk. And then they came up with those safety nets around the sides. But that would have been the same client back in those days. But yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that example. I appreciate it. Now, one of the areas that you focus on also is collecting data. So what are some key data points that help with, I don't know, building better ownership? And a lot of our clients, people, CEOs and others that are listening to our podcast here may not be leading a $1 billion or $100 million company, but they might be leading I'd say a 10 to 12 or $20 million company. And there is a lot of production and data and fine tuning and making sure the customer is satisfied, and accuracy is paramount. Accuracy for my clients is one of the most important things, along with customer service. So what would be some of those key ways of collecting data or key data points that you would say it's important to watch for?
Well, I would have a scorecard, and customer service would be part of it. So,
right.
But how you do that, I guess it depends on the systems you have. But if you let's think of a business, the local body shop is typically not a multi-million-dollar business, but they have to understand their schedule. Do they have the parts? Do they have the labor? All those different things. And I'm making this up as we go. I've never worked with a body shop.
But I actually have a client that is two auto repair shops in one enterprise. So
okay.
Yeah.
So as I think about that, you're looking for, is there enough places to park safely before you even get on the property, which many body shops that I happen to know from racing and things like that, that's usually critical. There could be a fender bender in the parking lot of the body shop just because there's no room to park. Or you park in front of the garage door and the garage door goes up and the mechanic's like, what are you doing parked there? I got to get this car out to get your car in. All those little things go through your mind. But back to the metrics, I can't work on your car if I didn't order the parts and you didn't verify that you're willing to pay the price for those new parts or those used parts. And I got to have everything assembled. So my scorecard starts out with, do I have all the tools? Do I have all the parts? Do I have the right parts before I want to expend what I'll say a team of labor or two experts? And body shop is a very highly skilled job that most people don't appreciate anymore. But I can tell you that it's a very highly skilled job that, from my experience, that you don't want to have the wrong resource doing the right thing or the right thing being done by the wrong resource. You need to be trained on what you're doing. One of the classics is a body shop's hammer looks a little different than a carpenter's hammer. And there's an absolute difference on how to use that to get the dent out before you're going to paint it again or prepare the body for the paint. So all those things come back into that metric, but I like to look at things at the bottom and work my way to the top when I'm building scorecards, when I'm looking at data, back to that data. So does the data show that I have a customer that's coming tomorrow, they're going to drop their car here, or a tow truck's bringing it to me tonight, overnight, there was an accident. Yeah, park it out back, we'll get to it. Well, the person that owns that car, the insurance company, needs to schedule. Can I come get things out of the car? I didn't get hurt, but I need to get my purse. I need to get my briefcase out of the back. So that's a scheduling thing. So all those different metrics to me are very important. And how do we run a smooth operation? And we have a mutual fondness for an organization called Chick-fil-A, and it needs to run like a Swiss watch at every single level, and that's at the lowest common denominator. That might be the cash register. That might be the drive-through window. That might be the French fry machine. But everything has to run to the process, which is maybe where I got my over aggressiveness to loving processes. Or maybe when I was in the military, because there's a lot of processes there as well. But that's the kind of I like to work for. They
those are great, great high process organizations you just mentioned there. In fact, with our mutual connection, several of our clients are in that Chick-fil-A ecosystem. Some owner operators that we work with and their teams. I'm fascinated by the fact that you worked really closely with Truett Cathy early on. I'm sure some of our listeners would want to hear any insider, information or ideas, things that you experienced with Truett Cathy. What was he like to work with?
He's the kind of boss that I still try to be. He cared about you first, and knew if he took care of you, you would take care of the customer. And many of us get that so upside down. But I remember, this is one insider tip, and this to the Cathy family, they will probably get a tear. But if you ever disappointed Truett Cathy, he didn't raise his voice, at least not to anybody I ever saw. And there's thousands of people out there, so everybody might have a different witness, but I never witnessed this in 11 years of being very close with him and spending many, many weekends opening at grand openings of malls with him. If he was disappointed in you, something going on, the environment, he did this. And that was his soul. I don't know why that we all have some type of a quirk about us, but Truett Cathy did this. That's a sign of I'm not happy. And in my mind, when I saw that, okay, what just happened? What did he see? What do we need to do differently? How do we need to treat the situation before he came over and gave guidance or whatever it might be? But Jimmy Collins, I'll tell the story wrong, but Jimmy would tell stories of how Truett would encourage him to ensure that when Truett wasn't around, everybody knew what was the expectation and how would you treat people or how would you fix a problem, because as we know, he was the ultimate scaler. As we look at the multi-billion-dollar business now, the time that I got to spend a lot of time with them, they were not doing $100 million yet. So, and then we naturally grew a bit, but took a long time to get to $1 billion, and then very quickly Dan accelerated and Andrew's accelerating. So it's a great organization, but you only get great in, I'll say now, thousands of locations if you don't teach the people, take care of the people, take care of the customer, and the best customers will attract, the best employees will attract the best customers, which is why Chick-fil-A has so many raving fans. When they hire somebody, they attract the best people they can, and they don't necessarily overpay for that compared to the same job in a different brand, if you will. But you earn more because you learn how to do a job. And Truett was always about, let's teach this person in high school how to work the rest of their life. Whether they work here or not, that's not important. Let's train them.
Well, Bill, I love this discussion on culture. That's one of my favorite topics, and we've enjoyed other discussions on culture as well. Here's another thought when it comes to culture. I've noticed that, especially in a large organization, there can easily become microcultures within a larger culture. What should we think about microcultures? Is that healthy? Is that unhealthy? Does it help us get results? Does it hurt results? What do you think?
So, having run a implementation consulting firm in hundreds, if not thousands, of locations at the same time, there's going to be team cultures. If you think about now that we're coming out of COVID, people are coming back to work. They've been working at home, so they have a home culture. That individual now had their own culture. They could walk to the kitchen and get a fresh cup of coffee. Now they're going to be wearing pants and going to the coffee pot in the kitchen or the cafeteria. They're going to be doing meetings in person, which I believe truly adds another dynamic than video can give. Video's been great, but we need to go back to being humans, helping humans get to humans the best. So the culture of a team, I guess as I've looked at it and run 40, 50 different teams scattered around the world at the same time, the team leader, back to the Chick-fil-A culture, or how did they scale? I looked at that and said, okay, in the consulting world, that team leader or that owner operator, I'm entrusting to live, breathe, think. I know the behavior they're going to do no matter what circumstance comes up, and I totally trust that. And that gets back to that hiring and attracting the very best that align to your culture. So each and every small team, you've got to have that one that then shows, teaches, helps, gives tools, gives training, gives books, gives pats on the backs to make sure that local team culture is absolutely, new term you taught me earlier today, flat, even though they might be very dispersed. There might be different languages. One team might be made up of all females, another team's a mix, another team's all males. Does not matter. We're all humans. We all got that little ticker right here, and we've got to communicate with clarity right to the heart so we can see the behaviors. Now, there's naturally, maybe when you're setting that up, you might want to test a bit. I don't just say read the book and go out and you're fine. It is set up situations where you see that person's behavior, you see how they perform, you see how they teach and train, and all of us are different. So it doesn't matter necessarily they do it the same way. Everybody's different. Our conversation might come off to some as different than what they would expect, but so we're all a little bit different. So you need to know what message you're sending and how are they receiving it is just as important to me. So is that kind of where you wanted to go there?
Yeah, I hear in that central, a central core culture, and just there might be some personality nuance, but there's this larger culture that we're all in. Part of that you alluded to too was in the selection of those leaders that will lead those smaller teams. So that becomes a really key part
of an example right now where in my business for 30 years after leaving Chick-fil-A, your wife calls and says your mother's ill and you're 3,000 miles away. You know right then and there it's going to take you 5 to 6 hours if you drop the phone and run to get to where you need to be. And in my consulting business or the consulting world, the team needs to know the second you hang up, how do we cover? How do we get you to the airport? Remember, you got your clothes back at the hotel. Go get them, get all of that. And somebody else is calling the airline to make sure you're going to be on the very first flight. That to me is when a local team has the right culture. They take care of each other, and then they walk down the hall, whoever is the remaining highest ranking person on that team, and tells the client. Don't let the client find out that person's missing the next morning, or you got to communicate. So to me, that's all about the culture. Be just like if the Henny Penny quit and you only had one at Chick-fil-A. That's a disaster, but you know exactly what to do, how to do it, because you've been trained well.
That's good. For those of you who are not don't know what a henny penny is, that's where they cook the chicken in a Chick-fil-A. So good.
Sorry.
It's under pressure fried oil. That's right. Well, Bill, I have one final question, and it's actually my favorite question. I love asking, and it has a way of getting to the heart of someone's own self-leadership. But here's the question. In your lifetime, as you look back, what was something that at the time seemed like a failure that ended up propelling you forward?
Well, it didn't seem like a failure. It was a failure. And I've had many failures, but this one will go down in my mind as the biggest. And that was in the late 80s and early 90s, we were doing a lot of consulting business in South Africa. We actually, apartheid was happening, so people were leaving the country, companies were leaving the country, and we were entrusted with the stewardship of those assets, whether it be Burger King, IBM, pick a company. We were down there as consultants, protecting their assets, but also running them now, not just as consultants, but operating those businesses. So the long and short of that, you do that for a little bit of a while, and then you come to April 15th every year and you go to pay your taxes, and your money's down there, but your taxes are due here. So the big failure there would be, what do I do? And I would say that I think it's biblical to say you never trust a man that doesn't walk with a limp. And in this particular case, I had a personal representative of our government with the three-letter agencies for about 15 years, because you're going to do the right thing. You're going to report it, but you can't pay it. It's illegal to pay it. So that was the quandary. So I call that a failure, where we didn't plan how to earn and then do the right thing. And I might be a bit of an expert on that topic around the world now, because you don't want to do that twice. Life's too short.
So what was what would you do again if you had that to do over? How would you do that differently?
One, we could set up organizations down there where we were giving that away. It was a small country, a very important country. I don't want to take anything away from South Africa, but we could have, today I would say, give that money to Divine Water, which is one of our generosity zone recipients. And they build freshwater wells in Uganda. At the time I said, I don't know, right? So all those different things come together, and get expert advice. Don't just take your own opinion on what's good tax advice. Go get an expert, I'd say.
That's great. All right. So way to live through that, survive, and also learn from it and know how to handle it better next time. So thank you for sharing that story. Bill, I want to thank you for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your expertise and even just helping us unpack some of these ideas about culture and ownership, execution and optimization. Also, we've talked about those a little bit. I also want to thank you for holding me accountable. You've been my accountability person. You've been talking to me regularly about how am I making progress on my book. I did. I met my goal. It's off to the editor. And so looking forward to getting this book out about culture really soon. So thanks for encouraging me there, and also kind of continually lighting that fire. So I appreciate that.
Well, I know you had a certain day you said was your goal, and at that time you were about 6 weeks away. And so, I thought it was my duty as a friend to remind you that time is coming down. Just like I believe I've got somewhere between 600 and 650 weeks left on this earth if things go to the long end. But I'm ready to go today if that's the answer as well. But I got to live those 650 weeks pretty aggressively if I really want to help people. So,
well, thank you for taking my goal so seriously, and I appreciate it. It helped a lot.
I have one question for you. What's the title of the book? Can you share that yet?
So the working title is Culture Brand, and it's this idea that an organization can develop their own. They can design. It has three parts. You can design your culture, then you can align everyone around that culture, and then you can scale your culture. So design, align, scale. And so the book will be out in the next several months. Looking forward to it. It may end up with a different title once it goes through that publication process, but that's my working title, is Culture Brand.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
And we look forward to having you on our YouTube channel, Meet the Speaker, very soon. We'll get that scheduled. I don't know if they're in the schedule or not. I forget. But
no, we were holding off because I had that deadline. So now I'm free. Let's go for it.
All right.
Bill, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate you being able to share your expertise and stories, and look forward to getting this out to the world for others to learn more about culture and ownership and these other topics that we've covered. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, and share. See you next time. We would like to note that Leaders Q serves individual owner-operators and their teams and is not affiliated, endorsed by, or in any way officially connected with Chick-fil-A Incorporated.